Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. Over the last, I don't know, few weeks, maybe a month, on my social media feeds, whether it be Facebook or Twitter, the book Effective Egoism keeps popping up. So I figured I'd do my damnedest to get the author on here to talk to us about it. He is also, in addition to the effective egoism, I'm sorry, he is also the author of Free Market Revolution, how Ayn Rand's ideas, I got to get it up here, hold on. How Ayn Rand's ideas can end big government. That is with Iran Brook. And he is also the author, and I'm sorry, I've already forgot it. Don, what is the name of the website you just told me about?
I write at earthlyidealism.com.
Okay, earthlyidealism.com. Don, welcome to the program. I'm very excited to have you here.
Really good to be here.
Now, my lighting is atrocious. That's why I had a little bit of a difficult time reading off the thing over here. So egoism is Ayn Rand's ethical theory. She's not the only variant of egoism, but that's the variant of egoism that you adhere to. What first drew you to the ideas of Ayn Rand, and how old were you?
Well, it was kind of a circuitous route. When I was 14, I decided I should probably figure out which religion is true. And so back in those days, like America Online had just become big. So I logged on to America Online and, 12 hours of dial-up later, I was surfing the web and I stumbled on a transcribed talk on atheism by an intellectual named George Smith. And the basic case was, look, you should be pro reason. And if you're pro reason, there's no evidence for God. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. And so I became an atheist and I was very interested in the issue of religion. About a year later, a friend turned me onto a book called Million Dollar Habits by 1970s self-help guru Robert Ringer. And he talked about ideas, including what he called rational selfishness. I was like, this makes just a ton of sense. Like, obviously, shouldn't you try to make the best of your life in a principled, non-sacrificial way? And Ringer, after I had devoured his books, was quoting this woman, Ayn Rand, a lot. And he had some critical things to say about her, but I was like, hey, I mean, I'm run through everything this guy's written. So I trudged a mile and a half to the local bookstore, bought a copy of Philosophy Who Needs It, and said, whoa, this is the real deal. And so looking back, part of what was interesting was George A. Smith, who got me into atheism, he was also influenced by Ayn Rand. And if you look at his very famous book, Atheism, The Case Against God, there's all these quotes from Rand and Brandon and so on. And so there was something about objectivism and about egoism in particular that appealed to me right from the start. And it's what still appeals to me is that, like, yeah, of course your ideas should be based on reason and not just whatever you feel like and not what authority says. And of course you should strive to make the most of your life, because, like, what reason could you have to do anything other than that? And what is profound about Ayn Rand is really defending those propositions at a deep level and fleshing out in a much richer way what they entail. Because it's one thing to say, follow reason and pursue your interests. It's a whole other ballgame to figure out what does it actually mean to pursue your interests and to follow reason.
George Smith's book, Atheism, The Case Against God, he absolutely demolishes every argument that there is for God. I remember when I read it, I was newly an atheist. I had previously been a deist, and that was like the final nail in the coffin. There was no coming back. That was a phenomenal book. In your book, Effective Egoism, you write about some of your struggles that you had in pursuing your career and figuring out what you wanted to do. Can you share some of those struggles with us and how egoism helped you get through them?
Well, one of the things I've done throughout my career is coach people and help them, especially with their career struggles. And so my experience, I don't think, is quite different from a lot of people that I've worked with, which is it's really hard to figure out what you want to do. And if you know what you want to do, it's really hard to achieve it. Now, I was fortunate in a sense I knew very early on, or at least let's say I had a sense of what I wanted to do. From as far back as I could write, I wanted to be a writer. Now, it wasn't like Ayn Rand knew from the age of 9 she wanted to be a novelist. It was this fixed goal that everything went towards. For me, it was never that settled. Yeah, I also wanted to be a baseball player, and I also wanted to be a ninja, and like there's I wanted to be a rock star. So there were a number of other competing things, but this was certainly an interest. And then when I discovered philosophy and objectivism in particular, the idea that I could spend my life talking about these ideas and contributing to these ideas was like the most appealing thing I could possibly imagine. But what do you do to become a writer on objectivism? Like that, there was no clear career path there. And so I floated around for a while until um, I was taking courses with the Ayn Rand Institute at what now is Ayn Rand University. And they emailed me one day and said, "Hey, we're looking for a writer. Would you be interested?" And yeah, there was no question in my mind I was interested. But that's when the trouble started. So I get out to Southern California 3 weeks after that first email. Didn't know anybody. Moved in with two people that I just found online, and they're two vicious French bulldogs, and had to figure out, okay, how to make a career as an objectivist writer. And I had been studying Ayn Rand's ideas for 9 years. I had been writing, my whole life, at least after I learned to read and write. But what it took to do that at a professional level was far beyond my capability at the time. That kind of really being able to understand how to illuminate some issues in reality with a philosophy, how to make that radical philosophy compelling and persuasive and objective to people who hadn't read Ayn Rand. It was just not something that I knew how to do. And there was really a period of a few years where I struggled to turn out anything publishable. And even when I did publish it, frankly, 90% of the words were from my editors fixing my mistakes. And, 10% is what I had originally put down. And essentially what happened was years and years of just trying to figure it out, relying on a lot of mentors, and just constantly thinking about these issues. So, I'd go to work all day, and then I'd go home and I'd dissect, all right, like why did this piece not work? When my editor gave me an insight on what wasn't working, how was he able to see that flaw and I wasn't? When I would hear an interview with one of my colleagues like Onkar Ghate or Alex Epstein, it would be thinking about how would I have answered that question and why didn't I have an answer as good as theirs, which was usually what the case was. And so it was just this relentless, active-minded pursuit that over time, and it took a long time. Really, it was probably 10 years before I'd say I really had kind of a skill set to um, be able to reliably turn out professional level prose from an objectivist perspective, and in my own voice that wasn't like an echo of somebody else, but that I had my own way of doing things. And really that was only the start of the journey in many ways. I went on to do a bunch of different things, marketing, sales, all in the realm of helping promote rational philosophic ideas. And the core thing that drove me through it was that that's what life's about. It's about pursuing values. And indeed, my favorite quote of Ayn Rand is from Atlas Shrugged. There's a paragraph in Galt's speech on the virtue of pride. And she has this line about desiring the best in all things. And that's really the core of idealism. And it's the core of egoism. It's that you want the best in all things and you're not willing to settle. But the thing is, the best does not fall into your lap. Like you have to create it, and that is a hard, demanding process. It's not pain, it's not suffering. It is an engaging, fun process, but it's a demanding one. And there's a lot of hard moments and a lot of hard setbacks. I'll name one. In 2016, I by now I'd been writing professionally at 10 years and really had started to almost plateau in terms of how much I was growing, and wrote my third book, Equals Unfair, with Yaron Brook. It was by far the best thing I'd ever written. And in many ways, I thought, like, no, I can't do better than this. Like, yeah, I'll get incrementally better or so on. But like the right topic, like it was just a really excellent book. And for various reasons, some of which were outside my control, the book just didn't do well. It didn't do horribly. It sold more than most books do, but it wasn't even as successful as my first book was. That was a real crisis. Like, where do you go from there when your best doesn't seem to get you anywhere? Like, how do you collect yourself and figure out the next steps forward? And that's really one of the things that led me to making a big turn in my career, which is deciding to leave ARI at that time, the Ayn Rand Institute where I was working, and go to work with my friend Alex Epstein at his organization. Alex had worked at ARI, but went and started an organization to promote his views on fossil fuels and environmental philosophy. And it was just a complete change in career trajectory. I was starting back as a beginner, but I knew I needed to do something radical to really elevate my skill set to the next level, because I knew unless I did something radical, I wasn't going to be able to surpass this thing that did okay, but wasn't taking me to where I wanted to get.
You know, your book, it's a really good book, really good book. To plagiarize Kant, I feel as if it's kind of woken me from my dogmatic slumbers. Like when you talk about practice and coming out of your comfort zone, because I've only been doing the podcast now for a little over a year, and I've kind of been floating now. I've got my process. I look for guests, I call them up, or I mean, I don't call them, I send them emails, I get them on the show, I do the interview. And from reading your book, I realized I need to question myself. What can I do better? How can I make a better connection with an audience? I want to have an intellectual podcast, but you also need to connect emotionally. What can I do to have that? So I'm really grateful for the book. It's wonderful. And also, you wrote about that, your book, Equal is Unfair. When I was incarcerated, my friend Brent McCall and I wrote a book called Down the Rabbit Hole, How the Culture of Corrections Encourages Crime. And it's a really good book. It actually was endorsed. I don't know if endorsed the right word. It received a very positive review from Dr. Stanton Samanow, who I would later find out Dr. Peikoff goes to or looks to for theories on criminals. And Brett and I, we thought that we published this book, we exposed the Department of Corrections, we gave all kinds of evidence for their fraud and corruption. All the local media is going to be knocking at our door. We published the book, we sent a copy to every media outlet we could think of, and nobody cared. And to come back and just keep going, it seemed like we were just utterly defeated. But in the long run, that book ended up getting me in touch with a state senator who is now a friend of mine. That state senator got me a regular spot on a local popular political talk show. By going on that talk show, I realized this is what I want to do with my life. So the initial defeat, it wasn't really a defeat. It just seemed like it. And that's what that sort of reminds me of when you tell that story about that book. Now, Effective Egoism, it's a philosophical book, but it's also a how-to book. I wasn't expecting that when I started reading it. I just thought it was going to be a philosophical treatise on egoism, but it's not. It explains it, but it's full of concrete applications. What motivated you to write a book like this?
Well, the essential motivation was I didn't think there was a really good nonfiction introduction to the objectivist ethics. And obviously there is the virtue of selfishness, which is incredible, but it's a series of essays, so it's not an A to Z presentation. And it was and it didn't tell you a lot about how to implement it. I mean, it has it's a treasure trove, but there's so much that you would need to know to be able to say, okay, well, how do I actually like use this in my life? And so just to give one example that we've been talking about, You want, in the virtue of selfishness, you would get center your career or center your life around a productive career. But how do you figure out which career and how do you achieve that career? That's not something that she goes into. And indeed, it's not, those aren't philosophic issues, but to live by a philosophy, you need to have views on that. You need to figure that out. And so what I wanted to do is present create a book that would introduce people to egoism in a really compelling way, even if they'd never read Ayn Rand, even if they never heard Ayn Rand. Because the other thing that's going on in Virtue of Selfishness is it's really assuming that you've read Atlas Shrugged. It's really like taking as the basis. I've written The Fountainhead, I've written the Atlas Shrugged, and people want to know the ideas behind those novels. I'm going to flesh them out. What's a book that you could give somebody that doesn't assume any of that context? And then can I actually take it a step further than pure philosophy so that a person really feels empowered to employ these ideas in life? Because I struggled, and in many ways, there's still a lot I haven't figured out about, like, how do you live by a philosophy and how do you use it to really achieve happiness? I've met a lot of objectivists. I met a lot of people inspired by Ayn Rand. And I've definitely met people of the type and stature and joy that you read about in her novels, but not many. And in part, that can be an indictment of people, but really what it speaks to is how difficult that is. It's a real achievement. I mean, it's hard to overstate what an achievement that is. And I wanted to create something that would make it a little bit easier for people to do that, even if they never did read the novels in the first place. Though if they haven't, hopefully my book will, encourage them to go on and do so.
I like that idea of writing for people who may not have read Ayn Rand, because Objectivism is an integrated philosophy that covers all the branches of philosophy, and it's not easy to understand. I don't want to say always, but for a long time, I've thought people can be good people without studying Objectivism. They don't have to become philosophers to do what's right, to have integrity, to be productive and honest. And your book, it really does that. It's just a nice, it's like a self-help book with deeper philosophical meaning that you don't necessarily have to get the full backdrop or the full meaning to implement. And Ayn Rand said, and I don't remember where, but she said that coming to grasp abstractions and ethical principles can be relatively easy, but implementing them is very difficult. And that's what you're showing how to do, is how to implement it. Now, you talk about how you actually mentioned Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, and and it's funny because when I was reading it, I'm saying to myself, is he actually going to endorse this? And then the next sentence is, I'm not endorsing his whole theory. I just think it's a good outline, because I too think there's many different types of intelligence. But you talk about how it's important for people to know what their values are and to know themselves and understand what they're good at when they're choosing a career. Can you elaborate a little on that for me, or for us?
Well, the point that I was making there is that what's the raw material you use to kind of project? Is this a career I would enjoy? Because that's one of the hard things to figure out, right? Is like, what would actually be a fulfilling career? And part of it is you need to explore, right? You need to participate in the world and learn about the world. Like, what is it actually like? Like, what is involved in being a doctor? What is involved in being a CEO? There's a lot of people that, I talk to that, I want to run a company, but their image of what it means to run a company is watching Steve Jobs presenting the iPhone. And it's like, yeah, that's 0.01% of what it means to be the CEO of Apple. You probably want to figure out what like the 99.9% is before you decide that's what you want to do. And so there's learning about the world, but there's also learning about yourself. What do I enjoy? What do I respond to? What fires me up? What really allows me to get engaged with things? And one aspect of that self-learning and self-reflection is the way that I like to use my mind. And that's where I think I don't agree with the theory of multiple intelligences, but there is a way of using one's mind that for most people are ways of using one's mind that come more naturally, that feel more at home and more enjoyable. So for instance, at ARI right now, I run the marketing and fundraising departments, and I work with a really, really good project manager. What she loves to do is organize complex projects, put them into schedules, hold people accountable, and that kind of like rigor and organization would drive me up the wall. I much more kind of I want to dive in, be creative, engage in strategy, or I want to have something that I totally control and that doesn't have to be managed with other people, like writing, a piece or writing a book or giving a talk. And so the more you can know about the way you like using your mind, is it organizational? Is it, uh, are you very interested in, like, do you love numbers? Are you more social? You feed off of interacting with other people. There's different ways of that one can feel at home in using one's mind. And so that's crucial knowledge that you can have in thinking about your careers. So for instance, I probably don't want to go into accounting given how I like to use my mind. But on the other hand, there's other areas that like uh, setting marketing strategy, that can be the most invigorating thing in the world. And the more I know about myself, the more I can make sure that I'm on the right track towards a career that will be really fulfilling and really enjoyable.
The book is about ethics, ultimately. Egoism is an ethical theory, but you devote, I don't want to say a significant, but a decent amount of time to epistemological issues. Specifically, you talk about reason. Why? What relevance does that have in applying egoism?
Well, to put it simply, the most selfish thing that you can do is use your mind. Think about it this way. What does it mean to pursue your happiness or to seek the best for your life? It's navigating the world effectively, and that includes your inner world as well. Well, how do you navigate it? You have to turn on the light, right? Like, have you ever been like in a hotel room or someplace you're not familiar with, and you wake up and it's completely pitch dark, and like you're stumbling through, and if there had just been like somebody dug a pit when you were sleeping, you're gonna fall into it no problem. You want to turn on the light so that you can much more easily navigate your way through to where you want without falling in a pit of despair. And that's really what reason is. Reason is turning on the light. It's allowing us to gain the knowledge of reality so that we can navigate ourselves through reality and live the life that we want, achieve our goals, and secure our happiness. And so, yeah, you can't talk about selfish. This is one of the things that the conventional view of self-interest completely gets wrong, to put it mildly. Um, the idea is that selfishness is essentially about doing what you feel like doing. But that's like walking with your eyes closed, not through a hotel room, perhaps this time, but through a, 5-lane highway. Like, you're going to get crushed. To get what you want, you need knowledge. And the way for that human beings achieve knowledge is by following reason.
I like your description of the creative process. You talk about how it entails both implicit and explicit reasoning. Can you explain that or elaborate on it a little bit, what you mean by that?
Well, the when you're trying to solve a problem, you can explicitly reason your way to a solution, right? I'm trying to um, uh, build a car, and I need to figure out what kind of material I should use for the some piece of the engine. Well, I can identify all of the potential materials that could be used to build an engine, and I could identify these are, their pluses and their minuses and so on, and kind of reason my way to what the best one is. But most of what we do when we're producing and when we're creating, and I'm using creation not just for artistic, but just in the broad sense of trying to reach new knowledge or new insights, is that we make creative leaps that we seem to go kind of 10 steps forward. So, for instance, I wrote a novel, and I was trying to figure out, like, well, how am I going to end the darn thing? And what happened was I got this spark of inspiration. Now, it took 20 iterations to get the details right to make it actually work, but I just had this vision of what would be a great ending. And the idea is that those creative leaps, those eureka moments, what they really amount to is a process of implicit reasoning. That is, it's not like a bolt from God, though it can feel that way. It is rather my subconscious doing what I could have done through explicit reasoning. And to give you a parallel, I also had a case of that in my novel as well, where I was trying to solve a more particular issue of I had a scene where the hero is going to get tortured. And what kind of torture am I going to use? It had to have certain conditions in order to be the appropriate kind of torture. And so literally I did, what I talked about with that car material. I went through books looking for different kinds of historical torture things, which, man, being writing a crime novel, you do some wild research. And basically just kept going until I found the thing that met all of the conditions that I needed for my novel. And then bam, I had solved the problem. And so creative thinking is really about putting yourself in the position to have those creative leaps when you can. And when you have to, you engaged in the kind of worked out, painstaking reasoning that is not as fun, but can get you to the same result.
There's a phrase I don't hear every day, an appropriate kind of torture. You better hope somebody doesn't like splice that and put you out there somewhere.
Oh
Don
man,
Watkins talks about appropriate torture.
there's enough out of context Don Watkins quotes to get me canceled 200 times over.
All right. Now, what do you mean when you say that work should never be a source of guilt?
This is a really interesting problem and a really tragic problem that I've observed. And it particularly, though not only, it particularly comes up when people have children. But it is the idea of the you can't have it all will be one way that it's put. This was kind of a big thing during the 70s and women's liberation of women, you can have it all. And then the counter to that more recently has been no, you can't. If you're working, you're not going to be able to take care of your kids to the extent that they need it. And the wider phenomenon here is just that people will often feel guilty of, oh my God, I'm spending all this time at work and I'm not there for my kids' ball game or their concert at school. And on the other hand, like I'm not there for my romantic partner. And when I'm with my romantic partner, I feel guilty because I'm not answering my work emails, and people feel pulled in these impossible directions and like there's no good answer to it. And if you think about what happiness is, at its core, happiness is unconflicted joy. It's where you're not at war against yourself. And part of what that means is that your values aren't at war against each other. And the reason that people struggle in this, or at least one important aspect of why they struggle, is because they judge themselves in each domain by the standard of what would I do if this was the only domain in my life? What would I do as a parent if all I did was parent and I did nothing else? What would I do as an employee if all I did was work and never did anything else? What would I do as a lover if that was my only But but your life is a sum of different domains that have to be brought together and integrated. And so the goal can't be, what would I do if this is all I did? It would be, how do I put together the pieces in such a way that I can honor all of my most important values? Now, sometimes you will have to miss out on that, your kid's concert. I have to travel to a work trip to Atlanta tomorrow. And my one of my kids is going to the Henry Ford Museum here in Michigan. And she really wanted me to come as a chaperone, and I couldn't do it. I had to disappoint her. And that sucks. Like, that is not fun, but it's not a source of guilt because I understand why I have the priorities that I do. She's 11. She's starting to become able to understand why I have the priorities I do and not take it, too harshly. That's what that things can suck, but not be a source of guilt if you don't hold yourself to an impossible or to an irrational standard.
That's an incredible point that I've never thought of before. And I've thought of self-improvement in a lot of different ways. But the idea that something can suck, but that doesn't mean I have to feel guilty about it. You know, if I can't be with my friend when he's going through something because I have something else to do, it sucks that I'm not there with him. But it doesn't mean I should feel guilty about it because I'm not necessarily doing something wrong. And that's when guilt is appropriate, when I've earned guilt by doing something ethically that I shouldn't be doing. Does that make sense? Am I capturing
No,
the idea right?
that's exactly right. Another way to think about it is it's related to how one measures one's self-esteem. And guilt is when I haven't lived up to the standards on which I base my self-esteem. Well, those standards of your self-esteem can't demand the impossible of you. They can't demand the impossible, and they can't demand the sacrifice of an important value. And so if I sacrifice my career, well, it's not going to be good for my daughter, certainly not going to be good for me. And so what can I do? Well, I can go to this thing that I have to do for my career, and I can make it up to my daughter by, treating her to a really nice evening out when I do get home. And so it's honoring all of your values in a way that's actually achievable rather than basing your self-esteem on some impossible, I can be everywhere at all times, no matter what. Nobody can do that. And so you can't feel guilty for failing to do it.
You know, I've got a little bit of OCD. I don't have a severe case, but for me, it's bad enough because I'm the one that deals with it. And there's times I get caught in thought loops and I end up getting anxiety. And I used to compound the problem by judging myself for having that happen. Like I would say, this shouldn't be happening to me. I've been working on this long enough, but it only made it worse. And I realized that I don't need to feel guilty about this. And a friend of mine actually said to me in not quite articulate as language as you just used, but he said to me, Mike, your biggest issue is you think you're not supposed to have any issues. And that just helped me a lot. And that's what this is reminding me of. It may not be an exact parallel, but it's about not judging yourself for things out of your control. I can't control the fact that I'm prone to obsessing. I can control whether I condemn myself for it, or if I, go lay in a corner and say, I'm done with this. I'm not going to try anymore. And that's the type of thing I think that where guilt is appropriate. If I'm doing things wrong, if I'm not behaving up to my own standards, as long as they're rational standards. But to feel guilt over things that I have no control or when I'm not doing wrong is just absurd.
Yeah, no, I think it is a real parallel, and it is in the end the same issue, which is to say that your standards should be based on what's possible to you is to say that you need to distinguish between what's in your control and what's not in your control. And I mean, Ayn Rand has an essay, The Metaphysical versus the Man-Made, where she gives kind of the deepest philosophical analysis of this point. But it's a point that's I think widely recognized by psychologists, by that what's really important in life is to be clear on what's in your control and what's not, and to never confuse the one for the other.
So you've got this great philosophical how-to book on egoism. What are the biggest challenges to living egoism? And in our modern society here.
Well, I mean, there's a few things, and it depends on the particular person. Um, I would say one thing certainly is that you're taught that it's wrong. And so it takes a real amount of courage to do what's in your interests. Um, I mean, if you look at, for instance, the kind of feedback that somebody will get on Twitter for, saying, "Oh, I got divorced," or I'm pulling my kid out and homeschooling them, or I'm putting them in private school or public school, like almost any choice that one takes in one's self-interest can be a source of attack, outrage. And I mentioned Twitter, but I mean, even more importantly, from your friends and your family. The any kind of self-assertion, you will run into disapproval from various quarters. And it takes a lot of courage to say, that's fine. I'm going to keep going and doing what I'm think is best for my life and what I'm convinced is best in my life.
Uh,
One other aspect that I'll raise, though, is it is hard to be in a anti-value culture. That is, the motives that sustain us and drive us are our values. And when you're in a culture that is bankrupt of values, it is very hard to keep your engine running. And this, Ayn Rand has a piece called Our Cultural Value Deprivation, which is a really profound and deep analysis of this point about what it does to a person who is not experiencing a regular and deep source of pleasure in life and values across the board, whether it's art, whether it's what you're getting in what you're seeing in politics, entertainment, the relationships you build with people. And it takes a lot of independence. Now, independence is always required for human flourishing, but the kind of independence that's required in a bankrupt culture, it's it's sort of like a what's the word I'm looking for? Um, well, it's escaping me, but you're dealing with a whole other level that you really have to be self-reliant and self-generating your own reward system in life in a way that is demanding more than most people choose are have made themselves capable of giving.
That essay, Our Cultural Value Deprivation, helped me immensely. There's a line in there, and I don't remember it exactly, but where she talks about how in a society or in a culture where we're deprived of values, only true giants can end up surviving. She might have said, use another word, but that was the essence of it. And I remember reading that and I was like, wow. And then my friend, the same friend that gave me the other advice is, well, then you got to become a giant. That's what you have to do if you want to thrive. And well, okay, I guess if you got to do what's necessary. An obstacle that I found to living egoism, yes, but with integrity and the responsibility of passing moral judgment is the amount of people that I have to deal with that aren't living up to the standards that I think people ought to live up to. They're mixed cases.
Mhm.
And it's a very difficult thing to say, should I deal with this person? Should I not deal with this person? How much should I deal with this person? Those are very, to me anyways, complicated issues. Is that common in your experience among people trying to live with integrity and practice egoism?
Yes, and it should set off alarm bells when you run into somebody who doesn't experience it as complicated. Because what often happens is that because it's so complicated, people look for shortcuts. And when they look for shortcuts, what they're actually doing with more or less levels of negligence is they're engaging in injustice. And if you look at Ayn Rand, she has an article in The Virtue of Selfishness making this point about how you need to judge and be prepared to be judged. But she bends over backwards to stress this is really, really hard. You have to be very attentive to how much information do I even have to reach a judgment in these cases. And then one thing that you said that I really want to stress that's really important is I forget exactly how you put it, but you said it's like, should I deal with them? Should I not deal with them? Or how? Right. So it can be it's not just a binary. It's not, oh, you're good, I deal with you, you're bad, I won't deal with you. But it's most people have good and bad elements, and you can structure the relationship so that you deal with the good and you encourage more of the good from them, and that you avoid and insulate yourself from the bad. But it's very, very tricky. You, I mean, look, how many news stories have you read about, a person who, for years has been cheating on their spouse, living some form of a double life? These are like married couples, and a person can hide a lot. Now, they often looking back feel like, oh, I had some clues that I wasn't paying attention to. So it's not that we're totally blind, and who knows, maybe the love of my life after 30 years will turn out to be a murderer. I think there are signs, and if the more rational and active minded you are, the more likely you are to pick up on those signals. But my point being that if somebody can hide that much from somebody who's living with them and married to them, on what planet am I shocked to find out that there's a lot about other people that are just friends or colleagues that I just don't know? I'm not in a position to have a fully worked out view on. And so, yeah, these things are difficult, but remember this: the goal is not to impress God, right? It's not like God is sitting up there taking notes and saying, oh, you got this moral judgment slightly wrong. Da, da, da. The goal is to achieve values, to have the best relationships with people that I can, and to avoid bad people that I don't want relationships with. And so if I'm wrong, I'll pay the price. Somebody that I thought I could trust lies to me, and that hurts. Maybe I buy a product and it's a shoddy product and I lost some money. Or maybe I cut somebody off too soon and I miss out on a good relationship I could have had. Those are the stakes of taking responsibility for passing judgment. But those stakes are going to be there anyway. And so the only alternative is to do the best that you can, remain open minded, and really try to understand what justice demands so that you kind of minimize your mistakes. And I think viewed that way, you can recognize that, yeah, I made a mistake. I'm going to learn from it. I'm going to get better and keep having better relationships going forward.
Well said, sir. So before I let you go, is there anything I didn't ask that I should have asked, or anything you want to add about your book or about your work?
Well, I mean, there's a million things we could have talked about. Well, let me ask you this, because you raised
Yeah,
this issue of, um, the not being where you are with the podcast that you want to be, or being
yeah.
kind of motivated to level up your game. What are your goals for the podcast?
Um, that's hard to answer that question, and I'm not evading. Let me explain what I mean.
Hmm.
So I got out of prison 16 months ago after 25 years. I have to learn so much. So I had to learn how to even set this up to do an interview. I had to learn how to contact people through emails, how to do interviews. And then there's also stuff that I just don't understand yet, like about algorithms and how to say the right things or post at the right times to reach the widest market. And at the same time, I'm navigating learning relationships all over again. And I don't know how much you know, but my girlfriend just passed away 3 weeks ago from lung cancer.
Oh,
So
I'm
I have
sorry to
to
hear that.
thank you. So I have to deal with that as well. So there's so much to deal with that it's hard to come up with an exact what I want from it. But the basic goal that I want, and that's why I don't just interview objectivists or objectivist sympathizers, is I want to spread objectivism by showing that it works even in cases where people might not think it works. Like I interviewed somebody yesterday about goal setting, for instance. The guy says it hasn't aired yet, but so and the guy says goal setting is a process, and the issue of goals is our very lives. So what I did in my interviewing, without getting into a big thing with him about objectivism, I just wanted to draw out how his research and his work is consistent with objectivist principles. So I try to do that a lot with a wide array of intellectuals. I'll even have people on to debate with me, so I can spread objectivism. But ultimately, that's my goal. I love to communicate objectivist ideas in ways that aren't always obvious, but sometimes are. And ultimately, I would like to grow the podcast to be big. And by big, I don't have to be Joe Rogan. I'll settle for maybe Sam Harris. You know what I mean? So I want to make a career of it. That's my goal. Figuring out all the different moving parts, that's where it gets complicated. Like, do I want to have episodes where I just talk on my own, and how to do that? Because I'm noticing with a lot of influencers, podcast hosts, radio hosts, it seems like to fill space, they end up coming off or claiming certainty on things they have no business being certain about. And
True.
I'm not gonna do that. If I don't know, I don't know, and that's it. I mean, it's no big deal to me. I'm not an expert on Iran. I know enough to know Iran is not a place I would want to live, but the intricacies of how we should deal with Iran and I have no idea. You know what I mean? So I'm hesitant when it comes to war. That's about as far as I go. But a lot of influencers or hosts will just jump right in. This is what needs to be done. I know it. I'm not going to do that. So it's how to grow an audience by being intellectually honest, being entertaining. It's just a lot to learn. But I'm doing it, and I'm going to continue to do it. And my plan is ultimately to make a career out of it.
Yeah, and so I mean, like if we were working together, part of what we would delve into is okay, well, like what has to be true for me to kind of take. And now you're doing a lot of the right things. I mean, first of all, just doing it, taking action. Like a lot of people will sit around and say, "Oh, once I figure out how to have Joe Rogan's podcast, then I'll start one,"
Yeah.
right? And you're like, "No, I'm going out there. I'm going to get guests. I'm going to work on my presentation and so on. I'm going to have a better background than Don Watkins ever had on his podcasts and videocasts." And but the other thing to think very deeply about, and that'll evolve over time, is like what's my value proposition to the audience I want to have? So you mentioned that my book isn't a systematic presentation of objectivism, and there's a really wrong direction my book could have taken. And I did think about this, which was writing a book that was something like an introduction to Ayn Rand's ethics. Now, I would have come up with a better title, but that would have been the essence to it. But what that assumed was that somebody was already motivated to understand a system of ethics, Ayn Rand's system of ethics. And then I thought, but I don't, that the audience I want to reach might not even know that they're interested in philosophy. They might not know what the hell philosophy is. They might not know who Ayn Rand is. And so it was, I can't, if I create a product that assumes that motivation, I'm done for. And so effective egoism, the subtitle is an individual's guide to pride, purpose, and the pursuit of happiness. And the value is, here's an intriguing take on the pursuit of happiness that you've never heard before. Well, I know that the kind of reader I wanted is interested in making something amazing in their life. I kind of think about a young Bill Gates was who I wrote it for. Like, what book would I hand him if he wasn't going to read, Atlas Shrugged? And so it was, but I also wanted an intellectual audience, an audience interested in ideas. They might not be interested in philosophy, or they might not know they're interested in philosophy yet, but they're interested in ideas. That is, they're not the kind of people who only want to read, give me the top 10 things I should do to be, getting immediate results, right? Like, they want to go a little bit deeper than that. And that's what, effective egoism and individualist guide, they're all evoking that this is deeper than just, a Tony Robbins book. So it's that kind of thinking about the audience that took something that on the surface might be very subtle, which is, hey, here's Ayn Rand's egoism, or here's an introduction to objectivism. It's a slight tweak that radically changes its relationship and its value proposition to the audience. And so that's part of what we want to be thinking about is like, are we positioning what you're doing to appeal to the audience that you want to have? And, I haven't followed your work enough to know whether that's true or not, but that's kind of how I think about these things. And so hopefully we'll be, give you a little bit more food
Oh,
for
it
thought
is.
as you go on your journey.
In reading your book, I'm actually considering that. How do I market to an audience? Because I don't want to be a person like Ayn Rand wrote somewhere, and it sticks in my head, that if you write trash, for instance, if you're an author, in order to cater to a specific audience, with the belief that once you get established, then you're going to switch, it's not going to work because you've already got the garbage audience. They're not going to be interested in your better work. And so I just want to be honest. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I might say something wrong, do something wrong. I don't know, but be honest, true to who I am and true to what I want to accomplish. And that can, evolve and change as time goes on. And by reading your book, I'm really going to start honing in and thinking about the creative process, thinking about what you just said, how to convey how to give value to an audience, more about what's the audience going to want to purchase, even though it's free right now, but that's what I want to do. So I'm
Well,
definitely
it's not free, by the way. It's free in the sense of it doesn't cost them money, but it costs them something
That's true.
just as valuable, right? It's their
Yes,
time. And
absolutely.
so and so just to highlight one other aspect is um to think about what's the proposition of my audience. It's not just they care about happiness, but I have to everybody's saying that they are going to give you guidance to happiness, and some of them have Harvard degrees, some of them are, Oprah Winfrey, super famous, and so on. Some of them have $1 million ad marketing budgets. So I have to have something distinctive that will make them think, oh, this guy might have something to say about happiness that's worth listening to. And so it's figuring out, yeah, what is the audience that I want to reach interested in? And then what gives them a reason to think that they can get it from me rather than getting it from another perceived alternative. So, if you're thinking in those terms, it gives you your best shot of getting to where you want to get. And this isn't just about people who want to start podcasts. That's really what you're doing in every career is you're thinking how to create distinctive value and how to signal to the market, whether that's an audience or an employer, that you can create value in a distinctive way.
Excellent. Thank you. It just occurred to me, like if I have to describe my podcast or somebody said, what is it? I would say my podcast is about ideas. That is, and so I guess what I need to learn to do is to target a podcast about ideas to the audience that's interested in ideas. That's I'm kind of thinking out loud. But thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you so much for writing a wonderful book. Where can the audience find you, and where can they find your book?
So the best way to keep in contact me with is to check me out on Twitter at Don's Writing, all one word, and earthlyidealism.com, and the book's on Amazon. So I hope people check it out. $10, $5 on Kindle. So I made it as cheap as possible. I have plenty of money making ventures, but the book isn't one of them. I want as many people as possible to read it. So go there, enjoy. It's one thing I've gotten a lot of feedback from people who um, have given it to those who aren't familiar with Ayn Rand, and so far the reaction has been that they universally like it. So if you're looking for that book of like, yeah, I got my niece or nephew and they won't read, a big thick novel, but they're interested in something contemporary, like this very well could be the book for them. So I hope people check it out.
I hope so too. Thank you very much. For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.